to Colourful, a podcast where we explore how race shapes our experiences. I'm Stacey Jane, a white woman and mom of two living in Cape Town, looking to challenge the systems of privilege.
And I'm Sena Zungu, a black woman living in Johannesburg, passionate about interrogating power dynamics and the intersection of identity. Our vision: to spark candid and open dialogue for a more inclusive South Africa.
We're not afraid to have uncomfortable conversations because we believe that complacency perpetuates injustice.
Ultimately, we aim to bridge divides through empathy and understanding. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, but it means we're doing it together. Welcome to Colourful.
So, Sena, a few weeks ago, we hopped on a call, as you and I do very often. Most of the time we're laughing. And we immediately started talking about the big news story of the day, which we were not laughing about. And that was the Renaldo Gouws racist video. So for those of you who may not know about it, Renaldo Gouws was a newly sworn-in DA member of Parliament. At the time of his appointment as an MP, there was a public outcry, and obviously very rightly so, about his suitability to represent the people of South Africa, given his well-documented past of extremist, bigoted, and racist views.
Yep, Stacey, I remember us just feeling so utterly hopeless that a racist had acceded to the legislature. This person would play a pivotal role in shaping the laws and policies that would govern a majority Black population. But as all of this was unfolding, I, like many other Gen Zs, kept myself updated by staying glued to, you guessed it, TikTok. I'd been following a particular content creator for some time, and I watched him keeping us informed and offering commentary on the situation, which was honestly, as serious as it was, so refreshing. And I just knew that we had to speak to this person.
And he has agreed to come and chat with us on Colourful. So today we have the incredibly talented and multifaceted guest. He is an up-and-coming comedian, a satirical journalist, a popular TikTok content creator, a BA law graduate, a social entrepreneur, and now the first ever correspondent for the Dan Corder Show on ENCA. Welcome, Warabile Mashigo, better known as Mashnotpotatoes. We are super excited that you have come here to be with us today. So let's dive right in. Yay! Whoop whoop! Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background? And I'm sure we are all interested to know why the name Mashed, Not Potatoes.
All right. Hey, everybody. Hi. Colorful Podcast and Colorful Podcast. I don't know what you guys call your team or your listeners. Do you like the colorists? The color shots of the colorists? You know what I'm saying?
Thank you for the suggestion.
My name is...
We don't have that yet.
Yeah.
So, we loved it. We can call it the colorists, what do you call your fans? The potatoes, what?
I call them potatoes. Potatoes. They're the potatoes. Very, very simple. My name is Warabile Mashigo. I am 25 years old, born and bred in Pretoria, West Pretoria. I am a BA law graduate from the University of Pretoria. And I am also, my alter ego is Mash, Not Potatoes. I feel like Clark Kent right now. But I am essentially a satirical writer, a content creator, stand-up comedian, social entrepreneur. A lot of stuff, really. Like, I'm on, the Chris Brown level of lot of talent right now. And,
yes.
You know,
amazing. I think Michael Jackson at this point. You're playing it too cool with Chris Brown. Try a Beyonce level.
If I start dancing, it's over. That's all I'm saying. It's over. But yeah, that is just me. The name Mash Not Potatoes. Mash is the first 4 letters of my surname, Mashigo. And it stemmed from really, it stemmed from a microaggression. So when I was in grade 4, I remember there was a teacher by the name of Miss Eden. She was like my technology teacher. And I remember she just couldn't pronounce my name. Like, she'd say it in all types of ways, like Orabele, Oralbi. One time I was called Orepile, unprovoked. I was like, wow, my name is now a GBV. That's crazy. That's insane, you know?
Oh my gosh.
And then I just figured, nah, I'll just stick to Mash because the name is very sentimental to me. And then over time, I was just like, you know what? I'm Mash, not potatoes. And then I just decided to let that be my thing. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's just That's me. I'm just a regular, smegular man. Mm-hmm. Who's not a potato.
Okay. I must also say, as you were telling that anecdote about, that how your name came to be, it started off as kind of a microaggression. We did an episode about names, and I met Maps Maponyane at an event at the time, and
Right.
he had told us that the reason that he had went by Maps was also because of some sort of microaggressions, and his teachers were calling him my punani if he tried to be like, Maponyane. So we all have that story. I actually just wanted to know, thank you for that background, but it definitely multifaceted individual, as you said. How did you get started in satirical comedy and like stand up?
So my journey into comedy, it started all the way, also started my childhood. I remember I was playing PlayStation 2 at the living room, and then out of the way, my sister and her friend came to the house, turned the Need for Speed off, and then they played this disc. And I was like, mad, like I'm playing my video game. Why are you doing that? And the disc that she played was Don't Kill the Messenger by Chris Rock. And that was the first stand up comedy, show or stand up comedy special that I'd watched at the time. And I was just so intrigued, right? That a man could just get up on stage, talk talk for a whole hour and get paid for it. I'm like, this is a dream job right here. And I think that's how it just started gradually. I obviously became fans of people like, your Dave Chappelle, your Trevor Noahs, the Dave Walker era hit like crack for young people like me at the time. Um,
Yeah.
and then in grade 8, I remember I entered myself for what was this thing called? It was like an orientation concert at the time. And I was in a new school. I figured I wanted to be different. So I decided to do stand up, right? So keep in mind, I just had Trevor Noah as a reference. I just thought you just get on stage and you start talking. So I get there, I hit the first joke. I'm thinking, great, killed it. Next thing you know, the whole hall is just saying, boo, boo. It's
No.
like the whole school, like, boo. Like, it was so bad. Even I'd be booed after, like, months after the show. Like, I'd be at the tuck shop line. I'm waiting to get a pie and I'm hearing boo unprovoked. I'm like, why? I don't understand. And yeah, the more satirical stuff, I think that just developed through Varsity because that's when I started watching people like John Oliver, Jon Stewart, Trevor Noah's Daily Show, and I was also studying history and politics as my majors at the time. So I kind of liked that intersection. And from there, it was always in the back of my mind that I wanted to do something similar to what they're doing, but doing to South African current affairs. And Late Night News was one of the major shows that led me to studying politics. And from there, I just figured I'd go for it. So how then Mashnotpotatoes then came to be, I had to start with my final year dissertation, which was on central bank digital currencies or the privacy concerns of it. So at the time, I was so bored with school. I hated it low key and I was very burnt out. And I figured I'm just gonna learn how to edit videos instead of working on my dissertation. Um, and yeah, from there, my ex-girlfriend suggested I started the TikTok page and I just kept posting and doing videos and then it molded into doing the news videos and before you knew it, 5 followers became 10, became 100, became 1,000, and now we're at 68,000, which is mind-boggling to say the least. That's big numbers, and I guess, and yeah, now I'm on the Dan Quarter show, so life is funny. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, we are so I mean, what an amazing win, and what a great what a great place to be involved. In fact, you mentioned something to us a little earlier, Senna and I,
Sure.
when we were ahead of the interview. Do you want to share with what that piece of information was with the rest of the listeners?
So in my first sort of dialogues that I had with Dan, he alerted me to the fact that South Africa has not had a show strictly dedicated to political satire since Late Night News with Loiso Gola, and that was 10 years ago. So by default, I'm like the first comedian in over 10, 12, 11 years to even be in that sort of position doing that sort of content on national TV. So when Dad said that, like that hit hard. That hit hard, knowing that I was in grade 7 when I was watching late night news, and to now be in a similar sort of position as them is just, yeah, I can't even put it to words, man. It really means a lot.
It really is a full circle moment. And I think, the gravity of it is not lost on, on Stacey and I. And it's actually so crazy because the story of how I met you is that I was watching the Dan Quarter show. We were live in studio. And,
Right.
Dan starts off by asking the audience, like, what do you do? What are your passions? And you said, I'm a stand up comedian. And I was sitting right in front and I looked back and I was like, I know that guy. And it is because I'd been following you the whole week. I was also taken aback by how young you are. And I guess there's this popular sort of narrative that's going on right now that Gen Zs are apolitical. Gen Zs, don't care about politics. We saw the voting polls. We saw, the voter show outs amongst Gen Zs. So there's this very popular belief that we just don't care. But you have blown that out of the water and you've clearly shown that's not true. But what are your views? Are Gen Zs apolitical? What's your take on young people getting involved in politics?
From my experience, I don't necessarily think young people in particular are apolitical. I think they either have a distrust with the system or they're disengaged with the system or with governance as a whole because of all of these years of these failures. You're talking to a generation of young people who've gone through school from grade R to grade 12, and they're either offered, little access to resources, or they were undertaught by teachers, or their schools, just did not have what was needed for them to really thrive and grow and prosper as a people. And then when they are lucky enough to go to varsity, NSFAS is there, but does not go all the way to truly allow them to study, or they don't even have any sort of education as a whole. And then you find these young people then being unemployed, being disillusioned, and just looking around and saying, well, what's the point? It's very clear to see every day on the headlines that our leaders are more interested in themselves than they are the people. So when they see that, they just feel as though, what's the point of even me going to vote if I know that it's going to be the exact same people in power, just in different font? Like just recently, NG Mutea was Minister of Basic Education. If you've ever been to Twitter, you'd realize this person has single-handedly dumbed down the masses. And now the same person is now Minister of Defense. And I'm like, how? Like, you know what I mean? So I think with young people, they care. They truly and honestly do care. If they didn't care, I would still be a struggling TikToker right now. But just right now, it's just a case of they don't have enough faith in the system as is, or not. They don't have any sort of civic education because that's not really taught in schools. We saw that with the rollout of the 3 ballots with the elections. Young people thought they were voting for a new councillor on the regional ballot. You know what I mean? So from that point, you can then realize how bad things are, how disengaged young people are from the system. So it's not that they don't care, man. Just they're untrusting of the system, really.
Yeah, and I must just say about
Yeah.
that Angie Mujeja thing, the memes right now are funny. So and that's the young people doing that. So I think if that's evidence right now that we, tomato, tomato, we care. This is not
Right,
okay. We're seeing that play
right.
out right now on TikTok.
Yeah, so I mean, I know we touched on this slightly at the beginning, but I'd like to come to this Renaldo Gouws debacle. And for our listeners who might not know, can you give us a brief backstory about what actually unfolded when you spoke about this issue on your platforms?
So I think when the story came about, right, everyone was, I think, reacting to the fact that we have this individual by the name of Renaldo Gouws. He's a counselor from, I think, the Eastern Cape, if I'm not speaking, now becoming an DAMP. And a lot of us were either content creators or who I think were on the leftist side of TikTok were well aware of this man. This is a person, an individual who's been, who's grown a massive following on YouTube, on TikTok, by speaking to ideally a very white conservative audience. And so when those racist videos then emerged, I usually was like, okay, cool, I'm just going to make a satirical video. I'm gonna make fun of him. Ha ha, funny, cool. When I woke up the next day, I then found out that the video got taken down for bullying and harassment, which I found like, oh, okay, you're being bullied, you Renaldo Gouws. Okay, fine. And that irked me out because even in the mere comments that I had with people who are primarily his audience, I could genuinely tell that in their mind they thought that this was okay. Like they thought in a logical world, right? That it's fine to be using those sort of words in post-apartheid South Africa, that it's perfectly fine to call for the killing of black people. And when you try and engage on them on any sort of constructive dialogue, it's more like, but listen, farm murders, or like Yu-Gi-Oh face down count, like, ha, Malema, you know what I'm saying? So that's when I just decided, look, I don't have time to be making jokes right now. I'm going to engage with these people. I'm going to say what I have to say. I don't care if they like it. I don't care if anyone watches it or if one person watches it, but I have to say this right now because I think, Senna, you touched on this briefly. It's the fact that this person's going to be going to the highest legislative body in the land, right? This person's going to be making laws which are potentially going to be affecting the lives of people who look like me. And this is a person who has those sort of views. And I'm just going to stand up on my platform and say, I'm not buying into this at all.
No, and it's so crazy that you said that because we had a chat with Graham Codrington, who is a futurist and quite popular in his kind of industry, and he was saying that we cannot be worried about respectability politics, or are we sanitizing it enough, or is there a way? Let's watch our tone. If someone is outward a racist, like you got to fight that. And so, you got to be blunt about it. And that's one of my favorite things in watching your content is how unapologetic, which is the way it should be, and how like just absolutely unrelenting you were, and that this is bullshit and it's not okay.
Exactly that. What really kind of caught my attention was kind of like how you handled that whole thing, and people left comments justifying his statements, and then you made that video, and that really was what it was all about. It was almost like having to teach people what racism looked like. So yeah, I guess navigating that backlash must have been challenging, and I know that it's an unfair and devastating feeling to have to get pushback against challenging racism. So how did that kind of affect your own mental health?
I think for context, I have been dealing with that specific audience for a couple of months right now. I think back to a time when I made a video on the name change over at Wood School DF Milan, when the school bodies decided, listen, we can no longer have DF Milan's name in the school. We have to change it to something else. And I remember I made the video about that, and I think that was my first encounter with these specific group of people and the way that they think. And instantly these people are saying, well, listen, this is part of our history, and why don't you guys name your schools, with your people's names? You know what I mean? Like, there were a lot of mental gymnastics that I saw a lot of these people go about to justify racism, or to justify whiteness, or to justify white supremacy as a whole. Because racism isn't just words, it isn't just using the K word or the N word. There is an economic element to it, there's a social element to it, there's an educational element towards it. And so you're dealing with something that is so unconscious, and you're dealing with a lot of people in this country who, it's not as if the voters from the NP from like before 94 just disappeared in thin air, like after one Mandela dance. It didn't happen. Those people are still very much with us right now in society. Some of whom have, access and control to resources over the lives of Black people. So we have to confront these issues head on, especially in this context we find ourselves in South Africa, because how we came about as a country was through compromise. And through compromise, you are going to have that push and pull and those sort of tensions. So, from a mental health perspective, it was difficult. It was truly difficult to deal with, I guess, the gaslighting, the ad hominem attacks, and just dumb people. Like, just dumb people. Like, you can have patience for dumb people, but like to that extent, you'd be like, But I was just fortified, and I think I made a video on this when I said that, listen, for as much as there are these 5 or 4 people who say these things, I am encouraged by the fact that there are 100 more who agree with me and say that, listen, people such as Ronaldo, people such as Ian Cameron, and any person who espouses these sort of racist ideals have no place in our South Africa. Absolutely. So it was a tough time, but through having that and having a great support structure, I was really able to do my thing and keep it moving.
Warabile, you spoke about the gaslighting, which I must say, as someone who also speaks out quite openly about racism, it's one of the things that frustrates me the most. And not only that, but there is this very tangible fear about what happens if you do stand up to racists and bigots. And we know more so for people of color that the consequences are very tangible and multifaceted. People are worried about their careers, how this is going to affect them economically, because as you said, racism isn't just about the words you use, it's a whole system, and a system that can push back and punish. So I want to know, has there been any consequences for you about speaking up so openly and so candidly about race?
In preparation, so to speak, of obviously joining the Dan Quarter show, there was an incident that I had with this lady from Aljamaa. She's a national spokesperson, but she's now an MP. Her name is Councillor Shamima Dolly Sali. Remember that name? MP, honorable. Not honorable to me, but honorable nonetheless. And I remember she was trying to kind of tell me how to do my work because I was making a satirical piece on their party and she was threatening legal action. And I think a week after I made that video, obviously Dan also did a story about that whole incident. And one of the things that I'd noticed about that situation was how she had the time and patience and energy to go to my comment section and to try and police how I should make content, but the same sort of, energy was not directed towards Dan. Not saying that it should happen in a case, but it was very clear to see that whenever you're a Black creative or you're a Black individual and you're trying to do something different or you're trying to actually make thought-provoking art or thought-provoking, conversations, you're at a high likelihood of getting attacked because many of my contemporaries in the niche don't have to deal with this. And this is why I give credit to Dan, obviously, for being able to have those sort of conversations, being able to understand that, listen, there's a great amount of privilege at hand of being a certain type of creator, being a certain type of way. And I'm always grateful for that, honestly. He's such a cool human being. Love him to bits, my dearest beanie man. But in any case, in terms of, I guess, the consequences, they are there. They definitely are there. Maybe I've just not seen them now, but they are definitely there. I'm very grateful, at least in my creative endeavors right now, to have reached a point where, because I'm so high up within, I think, the niche of political commentary, that I can maneuver around and have a group of people, or just people in general, who vouch for me as much as there are people who want to put me down.
Yeah, this conversation actually reminds me of one that I had about 2 weeks ago with another comedian. And he was saying that he finds it very challenging to toe the line between what he feels he really wants to say and what he needs to say. But toe the line with that and the fact that he has to make a living. So what can he say? And he said, and I think you've referenced it here as well, is to say there are times as you're building your career, the more kind of well-known you become and the more you have this unique brand of political satire and how you approach it, the more accepting or forgiving people might be. But the journey to get to that point is very challenging, and that's where there's a lot of this pushback. And he said even more so, there was a comedian that he referenced, quite a well-known one, who had to move overseas for because he said the things he wanted to say, and it was felt that was too much, and so it was not safe for him and his family to stay in the country. So really, the implications for what people do and whether they're willing to speak up in this space can be really significant.
No, that's absolutely true. I think as comedians, we have this maxim that says, funny is funny, right? So there's absolutely nothing off the table that, a comedian can't speak about, even if it is things that, is uncomfortable or uncouth or just in general. You're not allowed to say stuff like that, right? And I think that goes to the heart of what exactly is freedom of expression. Because freedom of expression isn't just the freedom to say or to share an opinion that everyone likes or everyone agrees with. It's also the freedom to share an opinion that is contrarian or is not going to be accepted by the masses or the public. So, for as much as in those comments during the period I was going through of people who I think were very hard on me or were very crass or said some very abusive things, I respect their right to still say those things because there are genuine criticisms there. They all of those opinions, misguided or not, stem from a place of fear. They want to be South Africans just as much, but they're just as fearful of being in this country as we are. So I think that is the core of it, and that's why us as comedians or as satirists, we are like the last line of defense if democracy. Because if you take us away, if we're not able to speak and to really tell what's going on, then what's going to happen to the rest of us in society,
Yeah, Orabile, I think that using humor as a powerful tool for social change is one of the most superhuman, superhero qualities I can think of. But I also want to touch on something you just said there about sort of the different responses between what you post and, other certain people who look a different type of way. Okay, white people with privilege. And I think I also admire, this is why we're also fans of Dan. We admire him using his privilege, understanding that he is in a unique position. There's often many times where Stacey can say something and it's going to be amplified and given legitimacy versus if I say it. We've
Right.
discussed it and I've accepted it, but if it has to come in that form for what we're trying to do, then so be it. And this is why we need allies. And so I guess I wanted to ask you, how do you then, now you're aligned with Dan, you're a free thinker, you say what you want. Dan is this white man, um, and you understand his role and you know that he's an ally, and I wholeheartedly also trust him. But I'm sure you get a lot of pushback from people of color now, or you will soon, as you said, being called this kind of sell outy type of person.
Yeah.
Does that hurt your feelings? Because I find sometimes, if I choose to align with Stacey and people seeing that, they don't almost want to see us be united and standing up against racism. It almost has to be like her on the other end of it, to be legitimate, my anger and my activism. Do you experience any of that, and how do you respond to that?
I think with stuff like that, there's a lot of layers towards it. I think on one hand, you do get, a segment of people who I guess are just mistrusting of the media or of, I think, large media corporations. And it stems from, I think, a genuine concern. Because when you look at during the apartheid period, large scale media was very much responsible in pushing propaganda against, people of color and indoctrinating people into a certain thinking that, listen, you are God's great gift to the earth. Everybody else, F them, but you guys, you guys are the ones. Like there's a danger, there's a swat kafa, like scary people. Be afraid of them. You know what I'm saying? So I understand that. I genuinely understand that, and I empathize with that. Heavily. There's also a sense of there are certain groups of people who I think have different views of what blackness is, right? So when someone looks at me, you know, they're just looking at me through their lens. They're looking at me the fact that I, went to white schools, I have a white accent, I have a university qualification, and they try to use all of those things to somewhat nullify or deny me of my identity of being black. When in actual fact, before any of all of these things, before the show, before Mashnotpotatoes, I am like a black Betty man. Like that is just the starter of all of that. And it is because of that when I then come into these sort of spaces with the sort of context that is around like being on a show, like, the Dan Gordo show, for instance, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, there's a responsibility on me now to speak truth to power, especially in a time like this where, you know, there is censorship to a certain extent with social media platforms on what people can and cannot say, Black voices in general getting put to the ground and being silenced. So I'm not naive to that reality in any way, shape, or form. So does it hurt my feelings? Yes, that's true. But you have to just keep on going because you understand that the role that I find myself in right now is way bigger than just me being on screen, making jokes about politicians. It's speaking truth to power, holding leaders accountable, and giving people a good show while they're at it.
Yeah, that's it's so reflective of a couple of conversations that Senna and I have been having during the course of this week. One of them in particular is I recently wrote an article on LinkedIn, actually, and it's received a huge amount of feedback. It was basically calling out white privilege. I've been in a couple of situations recently where I've heard people that I know say, oh, the UK, Australia, because there's no opportunities left here for white people. And it's just such an absurd statement that I felt like I had to say something. And what has struck me about it, well, first thing is there's been a huge amount of commentary. But the second point that really has surprised me is how many people say, thank you, it had to come from you. Because when I say it, it's emotional and aggressive, or, I'm told that I'm emotional, I'm aggressive. And so it's just so sad that giving legitimacy to this argument needed to come from someone who looks like me. What sort of advice can you give to people like me, people with a smaller voice than yours, but an equally important voice in our social circles and workspaces? What advice can you give to us, young and old, to help us continue this conversation and make it relevant in people's lives, so that we're not only looking to people with big public voices to have these discussions on our behalf?
I think having open and honest conversations it's so key and it's so important, because I definitely do feel when you look at the history of South Africa and you understand the fact that, yeah, we had a TRC, right? We had some semblance of reconciliation. The masses as a whole were not really to truly reconcile with the fact that we lived through 40, 50, 100 years of colonization and apartheid, and now this juncture that we find ourselves in. The wounds that we have are deep. And the crazy thing about those wounds is that they're visible everywhere. They're visible physically through things such as, spatial apartheid, for instance, or spatial injustices, or through resources not being allocated to certain groups of people but are allocated to others purely on the basis of just their race, right? So we have to be frank and honest with each other about those sort of conversations, even if it does hurt. We have to be frank and honest about the contradictions that lie between us as a people. And we may not find consensus, but at the very least have empathy and understanding from where we're coming from, all sorts of angles and all sorts of dynamics. I at the very least try to do that with, my commentary, where I'll be frank, I'll be honest, but I hope at the least you laugh and see that, listen, this is absurd. Like this is crazy, but like, let us at the very least laugh about it, because secrecy does not help anything. You don't build societies, you don't build trust, you don't build healthy, meaningful relationships without conversation and without being honest.
Yeah. I completely agree. Let's put things in context. I find a lot of these discussions, there's always some sort of amnesia about the past we come from and how it informs our current context. And I think this is probably also one of my frustrations with basic education is let's teach the history. Let's put things in context. Mashnotpotatoes, I've been following you for some time now, and you have all these gigs coming up, but all our listeners, anyone who's just getting acquainted with you, where can they find you? What's coming up next?
All right, right now, every Monday I'm at Six Cocktail Bar doing my open mic nights. Otherwise, you can just find me every Tuesday, specifically 9:30 on ENCA channel 403 or enca.com on the Dan Quarter Show. where I'm just going to be doing my thing, making people laugh and starting conversations more than anything. And yeah, it's Mashnotpotatoes on TikTok, on IG, on YouTube, everywhere really. If I have to start an OnlyFans page, we'll do it with Mashnotpotatoes. I'll have nude potatoes. We'll do that. But that's where you can currently find me, Calm.
So that's where we need to go to become potatoes, right?
Yeah, that's literally the only appropriate venue for such. So nothing more, nothing less.
So, Warabile, it has been such a fun interview. We've had a really great time chatting to you, laughing with you. So thank you so much for joining us here today. And to our listeners, I hope you have enjoyed the interview as much as we have. If you have, please follow us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube. I mean, pick one. You don't have to do all three, right? Share it with your friends, your communities. You can find us on IG. You can find us on TikTok. And we'd love it if you could join our conversation. So please do reach out to us. We're really keen to make this conversation as big as it can be. So till next time.